Welcome everyone. The webinar today is Budgeting 101, and we've got our two senior grants managers in the College of Education and Human Ecology that are going to present, and that's Neil Kelly and Bing Tion. They're going to do a high-level view of what budgets are, what's allowed to be put into budgets, and some examples of things that work and things that don't. We do a lot of programming for our faculty and postdocs and graduate students, and I've put the link in the chat room that will get you to all of those previous PowerPoints, recordings, and this PowerPoint and recording will also be put into that space very soon. Okay, so I think Neil's going to get us started. Neil, why don't you introduce yourself and let's get going.
Yep. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Neil Kelly. I'm a Senior Grants Manager in the College of Education and Human Ecology. I'll be starting off this presentation, and Bing will pick it up halfway through. Please, if you have any questions, type away. All right. Budgeting 101, building budgets for sponsored activities. So our learning objectives are basic here. We want the audience, faculty, students, staff, to understand the basic concepts of budget development, learn about the major structure and components of a project budget, and then understand some of the federal regulations on project budgeting. Those are stated in the OMB Uniform Guidance document. So the overview, first we're going to touch upon the research support available to EHE PIs. We're going to touch on a few basic rules for the budget development, move on to functions of a budget, components of a budget, and then we're going to take a look at a sample budget. So here's our office. We have a good team, actually great team. You can contact any one of us if you have questions or concerns. Okay, budgeting proposals. Well, it's a critical component of a successful proposal. Our budgets we see as having two functions. First, it estimates the cost of completing the proposed research. The sponsor, typically in the review process, will take a look at the budget and determine whether or not the proposal is economically feasible and realistic. Secondly, the budget provides a means to monitor the project once awarded. The better we budget the project, the easier it is on the post-award side. It's, having a good budget, it's a way to determine how closely the actual progress towards achieving the project's objectives and goals are being made, and to the relative budget. Pardon me. So there are some principles guiding the budget development. This comes from the federal government. So everyone knows a cost has to be allowable by the sponsor. So what determines allowability of a cost? We're looking at three things. The first one is the cost must be reasonable. So this really gets down to what's the common person, if they can take a look at the cost and say, yeah, that makes sense. Well, okay, that's a good test. It's reasonable. It also needs to be allocable. That means the cost has been incurred solely to support the research and advance the work of the specific research project. Third is, are these costs being given consistent treatment? That really goes to the heart of, okay, something we'll be talking about in a minute. Is it considered a direct cost to the project? If it is, it should be always a direct cost to the project. Um, so this is where Bing and I come in. We can help determine whether these costs are allowable or not. So developing the budget. Simply put, there are two components to every budget. There's direct costs, those that are, identified specifically with a particular project or that can be directly assigned to activities easily with a high degree of accuracy. Then there's something, the second component we call indirect costs. It's also referred to as facilities and administrative costs, or generally overhead costs. These are costs that are incurred for the common or joint objectives, and therefore you really can't identify readily, and specifically with a particular sponsored project. So direct costs, easily identified for a specific project. Here are some of the more common categories of direct costs. Of course, there's going to be salaries or wages. Whenever you have salaries or wages, we're going to be charging fringe benefits on that. Equipment, travel, materials and supplies. A lot of projects are going to have consultants or perhaps contractual arrangements, subcontracts. There could be graduate research assistants, tuition, and fees. Those are all direct costs. Now, the indirect costs, again, they're incurred for common or joint objectives. Our federally negotiated rate for proposals being submitted July 1, 2017 to June 30, 2018 is 55%. Thereafter, it is at 56%. Okay, the first category, personnel. Typically, we find types, we can readily identify the types of personnel on a project. There's going to be faculty. They're going to be budgeted for their academic time during the semester or their off-duty period. We're going to have research associates, postdoc researcher, graduate research assistants. Sometimes we'll include some undergraduate students and other support personnel, perhaps a program manager to help out with the project management, technicians, data managers. Those are the most common. As I mentioned earlier, faculty, they're going to be budgeted on a proposal, either release time or during their off-duty pay. So when these projects are charged for personnel, the associated fringe benefits are also charged. So currently, faculty release time is 23%. You can read down the chart, the other rates. So if this is a 5-year project, those rates will be held constant for the life of the project. Okay, so let's take a look at the budget. I know the budget formats vary by sponsor, but this will give you a general idea of what we're talking about. Bing, do you want to chime in, take over here?
Sure. Thank
All
you,
right.
Neil.
Yep.
For the next, let's take a few minutes and walk through a sample budget together. As Neil just mentioned, a budget typically consists of two parts. One, direct costs, the two, indirect costs, aka F&A cost or overhead. The next a few slides will show you the major components that would commonly make up the direct costs, which are personnel, next slide, equipment, travel, and other direct costs. If we go back to the personnel, you can see the personnel cost can be separated by senior personnel who normally are PI and co-Is and other personnel. So of course, we just made up all those names and the numbers here to show everybody, how do we build the personnel cost budget here. You have this column showing the base salary and the effort to be devoted to the project, and the requested salary, and the fringe benefit, and the total. One thing to worth to mention is quite a few federal sponsors like NIH, IES, Department of Education require us to use person months instead of percentages to show personnel effort in the budget, in the personnel budget. So we'll need to convert the percentages into the person months here. You can see the middle column here, calendar months, academic months, or summer months here. So we need to convert the percentage effort into person months for the proposal. Let's move on to the next slide here. Equipment. One thing we need to be clear about is the definition of equipment in terms of proposal budgeting. To qualify for the equipment treatment in the budget, the item must be a single stand piece with a monetary value over $5,000. So some common items like desktop computers, laptops, video cameras, although we always call them the equipment, but they would not be budgeted under equipment category if they do not reach the $5,000 threshold. Instead, they would be included as the materials and the supplies here. See the laptop computer with the value of $2,000. We should not list it here under equipment. Rather, we'll list it under materials and supplies. Under travel, we would work with PI to see his or her travel needs, such as the conference travels, mandatory sponsor meetings, meetings with the collaborators, visit research sites, etc. With more details and info available to us, we can come up with our best estimates on the travel costs here. For example, if we know the location of the meeting or conference, we can estimate the airfare, per diem, all those type of costs. Let's move on to the next slide. Other direct costs. It's kind of a catch-all section. It would normally include material, supplies, publication costs, consulting services, subcontracts, GRA, tuition fees, as you can see from this table. Then we are coming down to the aggregation of the total direct costs. You can see here the first line, $284,000, $750. Yeah, by adding up all the subtotals of personnel, equipment, travel, and other expenses. But we're not done here. We're still one step away from arriving the total proposal budget. Because we also need to figure out the indirect costs or F&A costs before we have the final total budget here. So in case we are using the full indirect cost rate, as you see in the table, 55% here in the budget, we'll have to take an additional step to calculate the indirect cost base by deducting the amounts for, see this italic font here, words here, by deducting the equipment, GRA tuition fees, participant support costs, and subcontracts over $25,000. Right? Any questions here? All right. In the event that the sponsor only allows indirect cost rate lower than the full rate, then we wouldn't need to worry about MTDC, or we wouldn't use modified total direct cost base. Then we can just go ahead and use the total direct cost, TDC, to come up with the indirect costs. I know it's a little confusing here. It's particularly to folks who are new to proposal budgeting, but our research support staff are always here available to assist you with any questions you may have. The team will make a great resource for you to tackle any budget challenges. This is the name or members of our team: Neil Kelly, Bing Tian, and we have Ms. Amy Sanford over OSU sponsored program office. She is will be taking care of EHE grant submissions there. And just do not hesitate to call or email us during any stage of your budget development, and we'll be very pleased to assist you with any type of questions.
So Bing, this is Kim, and any one of our participants, any of our attendees, please, just type or chat or talk. But I am curious about, so a PI wants to submit a proposal. Do you have any templates, or like how much of the work will you do? How much of the work should the PI do? Should they come to either you or Neil with a list of questions? How would you like to work with PIs?
Generally, it would depend on the PI. In terms of the budget format, we'll use whatever the PI feels comfortable with. Sometimes they want to use a certain type of a spreadsheet. Yeah, we're okay with that. Or they want to just use a Word document with a table. Would be fine too. And we'll just set it up in our own budget sheet.
So
there are also times PI just provide us with the cost info. See, I will want one GRA or one travel, then we'll just set it up on the spreadsheet for him or her.
Neil, you want to say something?
Yeah, it works best in my experience if we have a meeting right at the beginning to talk about these issues. Bing and I, it's our responsibility to do these budgets, and we will do them. We do them fairly well, but we need to know what's going in them. So that initial meeting can get us started. I think I'm going to need 2 graduate research assistants. I know I'm going to have a travel to Colorado, to California, so we can start building. I find that, we go back and forth during the whole proposal development time period, making additions, adjusting the budget. Please, Bing and I will do that for you, but we just need a little information.
Yeah. And that's so important, Neil and Bing both, is that people realize that you are creating the budget for them, that the PI does not have to find salaries or fringe benefits or calculate, what a GRA would be paid after their post-candidacy. So all of those things are your responsibilities. You just need to sit down with the PI and they need to say, like what you said, I need a GRA, I need this, I need that, I'm going to be doing this much travel. So I hope that PIs realize that you take so much of that burden off of them in terms of the budget. I know that you will also help with the budget justifications. You can get that started and review that with them as well. So we have a couple more minutes. I'm going to ask another question. I think salaries are another question that comes up, that a PI looks and says, oh, I need a data manager at 50,000 and I'm going to do a couple months of my salary, and you think it's going to be 100 grand and it ends up being $350,000. So would Neil or Bing, one of you, talk about how salaries, like how the budgeting model works so that you end up having salaries that the personnel costs can be really, really high. And we might even want to go back to the slide that has that budget in it with the personnel.
I'll get to that. Okay, so personnel, you have a salary. It's set, so it is what it is. The only adjustments early on, if the proposed project's going to start, say, in August, we know salary increases will hit in, October. I'm going to go ahead and increase that salary in that first year to cover the projected raise. Typically, we're increasing salaries 2.5% to 3%. So deciding on how much time you're going to need on the project, you really need to take a look at the project, because I think I indicated earlier, the budget really needs to be a reflection of what you're proposing in the technical proposal. So it doesn't make sense to budget you for 50% of your time, where basically you're just going to be reviewing some data sets and reporting on it. So the sponsor will see through that. We need to make these budgets as accurate as possible. That's why we're going to ask questions of the PIs. Well, really, what are you going to be doing? And we try to accommodate that in the budget. There are limits on the budget. NSF, they indicate you could not be over 2 person months in any calendar year. As always, there are workarounds on that, or that's where we would. I see you're about to say something, Kim.
Yeah, well, Carolyn is actually saying what I was wanting you to get at, that PIs sometimes don't remember that there's these fringe costs, and then on top of the fringe, then you have the indirect costs. So that's actually where I was wanting you to talk about. Okay. So if you go back, let's see here, these fringe benefits. Look at like A&P, for instance, 35.5%. So you've got $50,000 plus $35,000 plus then 55% indirect costs on top of that. So, I mean, it really does add up. So PI, if they're trying to do some of their own budgeting, this is where I'm heading here. So if a PI does just a simple spreadsheet and puts in salaries and even adds like 55% indirects on their total, they've missed so much because of fringe and other things. Or maybe they'll forget about, I don't know. There's other things that have to go into a budget, and that Bing and Neil know what they're doing, and so it's just really important to work with them. But yeah, salaries really escalate because of the fringe and the indirects on top of those.
Typically, we're seeing, in most cases, the salary, fringe, F&A costs, it's going to be more than 50% of the total budget. So you got to think
Yeah,
about all
that's
that.
right.
Yeah.
Well, so Carolyn or Corrine or Christina or Teddy, do any of you have any questions for Bing or Neil?
Looks like Corinne's typing.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Let's see, Carolyn, she's got a question or two.
French for A&P or the classified civil service staff really adds to the cost. Yes, it does. But
Yes,
those are required.
that's right.
I mean,
Yeah, well, this is wonderful. Thank you so much, Bing and Neil, for this explanation of uh, the different types of budget items and the federal guidelines that we have to follow. I just want PIs to remember that Bing and Neil are here for you, and that they will be responsible for this budget in terms of getting it put into Fastlane or grants.gov or whatever it happens to be, and that will relieve the burden on you to be able to write the narrative, write the research plan. And so make sure that you contact Bing and Neil way at the beginning, so we'll have plenty of time to create highly competitive proposals. Well, thank you so much for coming, and you'll be getting an email with these slides as well as the recording, maybe today or even tomorrow. All right. Well, thank you so much.
thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.